Welcome to the Business End, where we take people who have performed under real pressure and pull out what business and leadership can actually learn. Neil Heaney was signed by Arsenal as a schoolboy and came through one of the strongest youth setups the club has ever produced, alongside Ray Parlour, Paul Dickoff and Andy Cole. He won the FA Youth Cup, earned 6 England under-21 caps and was tipped as one of Highbury's brightest prospects. But across nearly 5 years as a pro, he managed only a handful of senior appearances, and in 1994, George Graham sold him to Southampton. At Southampton, he found his best football, the happiest spell of his career, and as a substitute appearance against Newcastle in March 1995, that was a catalyst pulling the sinking club off the bottom and all the way to 10th in the league. Then the ladder kept moving, a £500,000 move to Manchester City, a part in the greatest playoff final Wembley ever saw, a PFE Team of the Year season at Darlington before injury ended his career in the early 30s. What we built next is why we wanted on the show. After football, Neil and a group of fellow investors lost money on a Spanish development that was never built. Instead of absorbing it, he found Judicare, a law firm, and he did it without a law degree, navigating through legislation that lets a non-lawyer run a law firm. Earlier this year, the firm won a landmark case at the Spanish Supreme Court after almost a decade of appeals. Neil, welcome to the Business End.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Welcome, Neil. Let's get into it. Take us back to your time in Arsenal, March. The day you found out you were being sold to Southampton. Came late in the window, fast. Who told you? What were the actual words? And how much of it landed as news rather than something you already sensed was coming? Can you put us in the room?
Yeah, so the news was actually delivered, as it should be, by George Graham, who was the manager at the time. So from memory, I recall that training had finished, and we'd actually been training on Highbury at that time for whatever reason that particular day. And I was called up after training. One of the staff came in and said, George wants to see you in his office. So I thought it must have been that I was going to be called up or I was going to be starting that weekend. So he wanted to give me maybe a little pep talk, etc. So at Highbury, I don't know whether any of the listeners will have been there, the old Highbury. But it was the fantastic marble staircase and the marble hallway, which led up to the George Graham's office, which was a huge office. And George, being as he was at that point, he had a desk in the corner, but it was built up. So whenever anybody was going in to talk to him, he was always above them. I'm sure that was no coincidence, and it was by design. So I sat in, and he obviously welcomed me into the room, and he said, listen, he said, I've had an offer for you. I'm going to explain why I think you should take it. And he was fantastic with me, I have to say, he really was. I mean, I'd known him for 6 or 7 years growing up through the club as this figurehead of the club. So his words were encouraging. He said, listen, it's not that I want you to leave, but this team you see in front of you, it's very settled. There's 3 or 4 or 5 wingers in front of you, which, to be fair, Neil, if they're fit and you're fit, they're going to play before you. That's just the way it is. I think you know that. And I did to a point. So then he started talking about Southampton. The manager at the time, I think, was an old colleague of his, which was the late, great Alan Ball, another Arsenal legend who played there. So he explained that he'd been having conversations with Alan for some time. They'd watched me for quite a while in different teams and different circumstances. And he thought that Alan Ball would be the perfect fit for me as a manager. And Southampton as a team, they were a young team at that time. Alan was trying to build something. So I think 6 or 7 of the first team were 21, 22. So he was fantastic, I have to say. So he was very respectful. He said, Neil, it's your decision, of course. I'm not going to force you out the door. But I think you should take it. So I think after that, after the talk, which was around about 40 minutes, so he could have just said, Neil, I'm selling it to Southampton. Here's the number of Alan Ball, go and speak to him. But he didn't. He explained the rationale, which, as I say, I don't think he needed to do, but I was very respected that he took the time to do that. So I think I left the ground. I spoke to Alan Ball immediately. And once I had, I think I was sold, to be honest, with the plans he had for the club, where he wanted to take it, this young crop of British lads, and that he wanted to build a team around. He wanted to build a team around Matt Letizia at the time. So it was the perfect opportunity, really. And of course, Southampton were in the Premiership, very early days of the Premiership. So it was an ideal opportunity for me to go and play at that elite level instead of playing a handful of games at Arsenal and being in the reserves. So really, there wasn't much downside or much of a decision for me to make, to be honest. As soon as I spoke to Alan and heard his plans, then I was sold on moving.
So, just on that point, I mean, there's a couple of points on that, Neil. Could you explain, firstly, about how good Arsenal were at that time? Because we spoke, I think you said you made 11 or 12 appearances, and it was really hard to get in the team because it was so established under George Graham.
Yeah, it was. I think at that time they just won the championship, or the old First Division, the amazing game at Liverpool, where they snatched the title at the very last day. And as a winger at Arsenal, to give you a few names that maybe some of the listeners would know, people who were in front of me, so to speak, there was Paul Merson, there was David Rocastle, the late great David Rocastle. There was Anders Limpar, there was Kevin Campbell, there was Martin Hayes. So all of these people George had for a number of years, and he had a very, very settled team, a 4-4-2 team shape that every single player knew exactly how to play their position. And I think George relied on that. And this was back in the day where you only had 2 substitutes. You didn't have 10 like it is today. So it was a very close-knit group. The boys were very close-knit, very trusting of each other. So each of those players knew exactly what to do at any given moment in time in a game. And they had amazing trust with each other. And by extension, George had amazing trust in them. So it was very difficult at that time to get into the Arsenal team. As I say, it was an incredible club to be a part of.
With George Graham, we spoke about him before we started this. Can you explain his leadership style to the listeners?
Yeah, again, I was around the first team for a number of seasons, and one of the things that struck me with George is that the players had an enormous amount of respect for him, and he ruled with a bit of an iron rod. But of course, at that time, the Arsenal culture and the players who were in the first team, it's well documented, they quite liked to go out and have a drink. So George was very clear with everybody that it was almost a case of, listen, you can do whatever you want during the week. If you perform for me on a Saturday, then that's okay. But the moment that they dropped below those standards, he would come down on them like a ton of bricks.
And do you actually, I mean, you had a very difficult conversation with him there where he said, look, he thinks that Southampton might be a better choice. Did you think George Graham, as authoritarian as he was, came from a position of care, like he cared about his players, and that came across as well?
I think he did. I don't think you can have the trust and respect of a team if the person leading it doesn't have some empathy for his team. Now, whether or not that's personally, whether or not that's emotionally, whether or not that's just when they turn up at the training ground and he doesn't care what they do afterwards. No, I think he was, under all of the bravado, I think he genuinely cared for every player who was under his control.
And the final question before I think he goes on to his question is, obviously you're told it's your decision whether you join Southampton or not. That's a decision under pressure. You're at Arsenal, they're the champions, and you're told that it might be better for you to go to Southampton. How did you actually make that decision, and when does your mind flip and say, right, I need to invest, I'm putting all my energy here, perhaps that would be better off in another institution, another club, another employer?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, as I say, it was very difficult to get into the Arsenal team, but I was at one of the best, if not the best clubs in the country at the time. Why would I want to leave? There was, I think, the mentality of everyone at Arsenal at that time, and maybe that's why you were there, is that you bought into the ethos of Arsenal. You bought into what Arsenal stood for. So I think from a leadership perspective, if George hadn't have sat me down and explained his decision and the rationale behind it, I think it may have been a more difficult decision to make. But I think that the respect he showed, not only me, but I think he did this generally, he would always explain his decisions as far as I was aware. And I think when somebody does that, rather than just making a decision with no explanation whatsoever, that's really hard to take. But if the decision is explained to you, you may not agree with it, but if someone explains it, then I think you can at least get your head around why you should be looking to make one decision or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, obviously, as you explain it there with George Graham, very honest, very direct, very respectful in the way that he delivered his message. I mean, disappointing news of you obviously very enamoured and very happy at Arsenal at that particular time. But looking back in hindsight, a great opportunity for you to go to Southampton to play more first team Premiership soccer, etc., etc. As you look back on your career, I'm sure there were other examples, either personally or with other teammates in different environments where there was contrast, where that message, that same type of message wasn't as well delivered as George Graham did it. How, and if that's correct, how did that contrast of it being delivered correctly and incorrectly shape how you deliver tough conversations in your business life?
Yeah, try to be fairly similar, to be honest, Justin, that, things happen, mistakes get made, and decisions have to be made. But I think if you include people in those conversations and get their thoughts on why you think you should be going in one direction or another, and almost have a bit of a collaborative approach to it and explain your decisions. Listen, I saw a quote from Clive Woodward recently, where he said, listen, it was collaborative in the dressing room. Ultimately, I had to make the decision, and that's true. So I think if you explain things to people, they may not what you tell them. And ultimately, you have to make the decision. But I do try and include anybody in any decisions I make. But ultimately, I have to do what's right for the business.
So Saints hadn't won since before Christmas. Saturday the 20th, you stripped off on the touchline, about to go on, a goal down with 4 minutes left. What was the feeling in that group as you walked on, and what's quietly gone after months of losing, and what somehow you're still holding?
Well, I think, everyone always says that, winning is a habit, but sometimes so is losing. You get into a habit of losing, and it's hard to break that cycle. And sometimes it's just, an innocuous event which isn't planned. A goal that can go in off the back of someone's head, or it can be a deflection that completely changes the team's perspective. Usually in the games where you continually lose, something unfortunate or something doesn't quite go your way, a call goes against you, a penalty goes against you, an offside doesn't get... So you can almost feel sorry for yourselves, and the losing habit tends to kick in. So I don't think from that Southampton team we were starting to do anything different. We had belief that we would come out of this run at some point. We just needed to hold the line. We just needed all to do our job and make sure that we were doing that to the best of our abilities, and it would change for us. And I think that Newcastle game, who were flying high at the time, was just that moment in time where there was a ricochet in the box. It was late on. It wasn't as if it was a fantastic move. It was just a moment in time, and we were able just to take that moment, and then we were then able to build. We broke that cycle. But I don't think any of us were ever downhearted. We always knew we would get out of it because we were working our socks off to do so.
That's a very interesting point there. I think, and we all experience this, life, business, sport, where things aren't going your way, where you're having a run of setbacks, but you've got a strong plan, you've got a group of players moving, or a group of people moving in the same direction. The temptation is always to change something dramatic, to look to change that momentum, and sometimes that's correct, but also it's just sometimes being consistent, keep on smacking the rock again and again and again until it breaks, and and that can come, and then that momentum then changes. Would you agree with that? Was that how it felt in the camp at the time?
I think so. from what I can remember of those days, obviously time moves on and your memory becomes a little bit more fallible, but I can never remember a time where we were downtrodden. We believed in what we were doing. The manager was a great man manager, the late great Alan Ball. If there was one thing he could do, he could deliver a team talk. So I think we were all of the opinion. And listen, the Premier League at that time, it was the place to be. You know, nobody wanted to drop out of the Premiership. But we just believed in a plan. We had a strategy. And I think we believed that we would get out of it. Even if that ran us to the last game of the season, we all believed 100% that we would get out of it. And I think that mindset served us well in that when this chance appeared or this moment in time appeared, we were able to turn on that, and then everything flowed again from that. The winning mentality, so to speak, came back to us.
So obviously still talking about that particular game, I just want to talk about decision making under pressure. So the ball comes to you, you probably got three or four things you could possibly do. How do you make a decision under that sort of pressure where you make one clear action and you think it's going to be the right one? How do you do it? How do you make those decisions?
Well, I think that one moment in time is not an isolated incident. It's an isolated incident at that point, of course. But what sits behind that is a decade of training and preparation and discipline and knowing your job, knowing what to do in virtually every circumstance over a decade as a footballer or a rugby player. You know your job inside out. You know where you should be when the ball is in certain areas of the pitch. You know what you should be doing if someone's in a certain area of the pitch. So that one moment, it would be easy for me to say that, you know, I was very calm and there was ice flowing through my veins and I just very coolly put the ball in the net. But it was more instinct, to be honest. And that instinct came from being in the right place, being in and around, knowing perhaps what was going to happen, rather than any grand plan. But as I say, I think what sits behind any major decision that a player makes in any sport is the years and years of preparation that nobody sees.
Yeah, and just two things on that, Neil. They did a study where they were looking at decision making with elite athletes and business leaders. They did a study and they were saying that not only do elite athletes make quicker decisions, they make better decisions as well. And I'm just wondering if that is in the DNA, naturally, in an elite performer. I know a lot of it is instinct.
Yeah, I mean, in sport, the moment comes and if you don't take it, it's gone. So it has to be on instinct most of the time. In the business world and in professional world, you don't make decisions in a fraction of a second. You make decisions based on data, you make decisions based on maybe a board resolution, you make decisions on a team meeting. So it very rarely does it spin on an instant decision that you have to make, as in sport. But I do think clarity of thought is important. So that moment, it wasn't as if, as I say, trying to grandiose, that it was everything that I'd ever worked up to. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I think in business, that transferable skill to be able to make the decision and not panic and believe in the decision that you are making. And maybe it might be the wrong one, but make a decision.
Yeah.
I think more is lost with uncertainty than certainty, as they say, or a wrong decision rather than no decision. And I do think ultimately someone's got to make a decision.
Do you ever get frustrated with the slowness of decision making in your business career?
Maybe not the slowness in the decision making, slowness in the process. Because we're dealing with courts and we're dealing with litigation and we're dealing with long cases which tend to run for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. It's very difficult to have to make a quick decision. You have weeks and months to prepare to make any decision. I think the thing to always hold on to is to trust the process. Trust that you've got a process to make the decisions, and then trust in that process.
So, quick question on that, Neil. Imagine, like, say if you're trying to get a decision from a group of people and consensus is needed, you've already made your decision, maybe even weeks before they can make theirs. How do you bring them together to make that decision, but when perhaps you've already seen it? When you're in a consensus situation as a business owner, you need everyone behind you.
Yeah, and listen, leaders are fallible as well. So the decision that you may have made in your mind, you sit down with the team and you listen to their viewpoint, you listen to the way they think maybe we should be making the decision. And, I think you've not got to be too stubborn to sometimes think, well, actually, my decision wasn't the right one here. So I think if you involve the team with those decisions, then I think you end up making the right decision. Ultimately, as I say, someone always has to make the final call, and that's on you. But for me, making sure that, and even if it's just a sanity check, if I just say to one of the team members, listen, this is the way I think we should go here, it may be nothing other than, yeah, and I completely agree. That's enough. It may be, well, I see where you want to go with that, but have you considered this, this, and this? And I think as someone who has to make the final call, I think you have to look at everything and then make what you think is the best decision.
Yeah. As a late great Brian Clough, I don't know, some of his pearls of wisdom, he says, I'll listen to everyone and then I'll make my decision.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for that.
Yeah, I think the other one, when I want your opinion, I'll give it to you.
Yeah. So you built Judicare in one of the most credential-heavy industries there is, and you're not a solicitor yourself. You had to bring qualified lawyers in and lead them. Take us to that early room where every other person's letters outranked yours. How did you actually earn the right to run it, and what did you have to prove first, and to whom?
Good question. I don't think I had to prove anything to anybody, to be honest. I think the first thing that I tried to make clear to these lawyers, and this wasn't just anybody in the UK, it was all of the lawyers that we deal with around the world, is that I wasn't trying to do their job. They were the experts. What I was trying to bring to it was to get them to buy into an ethos of what I wanted the firm to look like. And could they then work within that environment? So I think trust was an early driver. I had to gain their trust. I wasn't there to tell them what to do, notwithstanding what we were talking about decisions, but I wasn't there to tell them about the law. I had no right to do that. I wasn't there to tell them how to run a legal case. I had no right to do that. But what I could do was offer a different perspective from a different environment where the team was everything. Yes, there was individuals in the team who every individual in a team sport makes hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions in a game, but they're all focused on where does the team need to go. So I think I tried to make it collaborative, still do. I tried to not make it a competition. I want them to feel that they've got a voice. So I think trust and, dare I say, a bit of respect at the beginning was the way I approached it. I didn't want to go in, kick the front door down, so to speak, and lay the law down. That wasn't how I was brought up in team environments. So I think having that team mentality and that history of working with all types of people when you play elite football or elite rugby or whatever it is, everyone's coming from a different background. No two people are ever the same. So when you've been in a team environment and you can work with people, you have empathy with people, you understand them. You may never be their best friend, but you're all working towards one goal, and that's usually to win on a Saturday or win on Wednesday. In business, it's a little bit different, but you still have to have a strategy. So I suppose the long-winded answer, Justin, was try to build a bit of trust with them, and see that if they wanted to be part of what I wanted to build, I would gladly have them along for the ride.
And obviously, you've moved around different environments through your football career. New players coming into an environment you're already in, or you moving into a new environment. Do you have any examples of where you saw that trust being built in a soccer context really, really well, that has shaped and moved how you do that in the business world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost an amalgamation of everything I learned through football, way back from signing at Arsenal at 13 to finishing at 30. The experiences were varied. And we talked earlier about the huge highs of winning games, winning at Wembley, playing for England at under 21 level. But there are so many lows as well. And making sure that if you have teammates that support you and you support them through the highs and the lows, because it's not always going to be perfect. If you can create that environment with your team in a business or in any other work, almost create that mindset that, listen, we're all in this together. If one of us feels something, we all feel it. Sometimes that's not always possible. If you can try and build that environment where everyone thinks that they've got a say, that's quite powerful. It's a powerful team environment to defeat, really.
So probably a law firm specific question, Neil. You know, there's obviously a trend at the moment, and probably your firm is quite pioneering ahead of the curve, where private equity is investing into law firms heavily, and they're looking at the business of law. Do you think that law firms should have more CEOs rather than the traditional managing partners of law firms that are qualified lawyers and have gone up through the ranks? And what do you think the business of law can learn from sport in terms of how they manage and lead their organisations?
Well, I think law firms, certainly in my experience of dealing with them for 20 years, the good ones have that collaborative approach. They want to bring other team members in. They want to listen to outside voices. They want to listen to opinions. They don't form opinions quickly. It takes lawyers typically quite a while to decide, this is exactly what I'm going to do. So no decisions in law, as far as my experiences, a knee-jerk reaction. They're the process of a lot of thinking, a lot of deliberation, a lot of meetings, maybe too many. But certainly I think the outside influence of a non-lawyer, and I think it is, when we talked again, I think there's more and more of that, certainly in the private equity sector, where non-lawyers, they're not making legal decisions, they're making a decision for the firm that they think can take it in a certain way. And then everybody would get on board with that. So I don't see anything wrong or anything backward in bringing more people into law firms who can offer a different angle or a different perspective or a different life experience that they may have brought from football or from elite sport or whatever it is, because it can only strengthen a team, I think. The more experiences you have can only strengthen it. I don't think it can weaken it.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing more and more CEOs appointed at law firms, and also conversely, we're seeing managing partners just completely give up doing law and becoming actual CEOs of their firms. So you know, it's big business now, the law firms, with all the mergers and things like that. So yeah, I do think like they can benefit a lot from outside leadership traits.
I would agree.
So yeah, and just going on to now, you're setting up the law firm. You have to be a legal services company for a number of years until you got an ABS license, which I think came through in 2016. When you got those sort of constraints, when you got those sort of constraints, how do you keep the discipline to stick with a plan, and how can you turn those constraints into perhaps a competitive advantage for when you do get your license?
Well, I think that the license was a natural progression anyway. So before the ABS was allowed, effectively, we were doing the same thing. We were approaching cases and we were approaching how we dealt with cases and clients the same way. It's just that we were a non-regulated entity at that point. So nothing really changed. Our ethos and the DNA behind Judicare hasn't changed. What's changed is the regulated environment. And that was a decision that we made, actually. So we were an unregulated entity for nearly 9 years. But I think because we started talking to lots of professional bodies who loved what we did and the idea of what we did, but they felt that they couldn't put us in front of their clients because there was no safety net there. There was no regulated body that they could complain to. So I think we took the decision internally that, listen, want to build something more substantial, something that people, when they see the brand, they can have trust in it. And a lot of that flows from having a SRA regulated firm and all of the guardrails and the PI insurance and everything that wraps around that. I think from a mindset perspective and how we dealt with clients, I don't think that's really changed with the regulatory things that we have to do when we take a new client on, the anti-money laundering regulations and statutory regulations we have to abide by, of course. But I think Judicare as a company, I don't think we treat anyone any differently from when we did 7 or 8 years ago, other than we have a lot more experience. But I think the client journey hopefully is the same.
So let's go on to one of your many, but I think a significant win in the Spanish Supreme Court. The developer was bankrupt and gone. The obvious target had vanished. The pivot was deciding to go after the bank instead as a guarantor. Take us to that decision. What did you know and not know when you made the call to chase a party most people wouldn't even thought of to pursue?
Well, those cases, there was already a Supreme Court precedent on these issues, which obviously we then piggybacked on the back of. But first and foremost, we were going after the developer for breach of contract. He hadn't returned the deposit to the client, he hadn't built the property, so he was the natural choice. The issue legally was that we couldn't go for the bank first, we had to go for him. So when it was clear that that option was off the table, the natural pivot then was towards who could we turn our guns on now? And the bank were there because there was this little known piece of legislation at the time, which said that in the absence of the developer being able to refund the money, the bank in certain circumstances, it's not a catch-all, it doesn't mean everything, but certain things have to happen. And if those things align, then you can then go for the bank. And of course, banks don't typically go bankrupt. So using the law allowed us a second bite, the cherry, effectively. But of course, the bank have very deep pockets and they're not in it for the short term, they're in it for the long term. So it was the decision to pivot and go to the bank was an easy and a natural one. But the process that followed was incredibly frustrating, of course.
So you said that it's coming down to as much about your tenacity, as much as legal expertise. When you're like, you say banks, have deep pockets to instruct lawyers to slow the process down, if need be, and that creates a lot of power in the legal process. How do you store that tenacity that you had personally and install it into your team to keep going when things are getting tough, when perhaps you could try and look for a quick settlement maybe? How do you install that? And when do you think, I can see the team I've created a standard here which goes beyond me?
Yeah, I mean, it does create an imbalance, of course. The bank, they can play a court case for 10 years and not think twice about it. It's effectively, for the bank, it's a number on a spreadsheet. What I always try to keep front and center. And obviously it's not just us battling here. It's the client behind us. Or it's the client we're standing shoulder to shoulder with. They're in this 10-year fight as well. So it's making sure that they've got the will to carry on. Making sure that we explain that this is entirely normal, that the bank would appeal. It's just a process. Let's follow the process. There's already a case law that supports what we're doing here, so we're not just going out on a limb. So I think, again, coming back to that, making sure everybody has an opinion, even the client, making sure that they trust in what we're doing, trust in the process, and let the law allow us to do what we're doing. And so I think that, again, going back to the football analogy, everything you do during the week is to execute a plan on Saturday. What we're doing in the legal cases is that Monday to Friday just might be 10 years. But the game on the Saturday is the key. The day of the trial, the day of the hearing, how you present that, that's our game on a Saturday. So, of course, it's elongated and enlarged. But effectively, we sit down, we have a strategy, we work that strategy to its natural conclusion, and we execute that natural conclusion. That's very similar to a game plan in a team sport.
So just a question on tenacity and will to win and succeed. And this is actually one of the things which I think personally is one of the biggest challenges of leaving sport and going into business. You've got that the will to win, the durability, the tenacity, and then you go into a profession like the law, particularly litigation, where, it's disputes, but as we all know, it's about negotiation, discussion, settlement. How do you balance those two things when your natural urge is to score effectively?
Good question. Again, I think in terms of collaboration, again, I keep going back to that, trying to make sure everybody is involved in decision making. Now, obviously, clients are very emotional about their case, as they should be. But if you explain to them from a legal standpoint that actually this is far better, we can settle this case now. You're not going to get everything you want. You're going to get 80% of it. Do you want this now? Draw a line under it and get on with the rest of your life. And that's your decision. Or do you want to fight it and maybe get 90% or 100%, but in 10 years' time? And all of the stress and the anxiety and everything that goes with a court case, especially in a foreign jurisdiction. This isn't a court case which is happening in the UK, which I think is, for most people, it's easier to understand. This is a court case that might be happening in Morocco or in Dubai or in Spain. So I think making sure that we're very clear with people on the decisions and why we consider going one way or the other. And if they want to go the other way, obviously we would support them in that. 99% of the people will listen to the advice when we explain the rationale behind it. And I think going right back to the very first question you asked about why did I leave Arsenal, it was because George explained why.
How you're speaking to your clients is what George Graham said to you when you're a player, which is basically, go to Southampton, there the choice is. If you want to stay here, we'll support you. And that's how you're speaking to your clients. I'm just, wondering whether that's just instinct because you've learned that or been in that environment, or whether it's something that you've developed with the law. But I suspect it comes from sport.
It does, 100%. It comes from those experiences of, and they were managers who never explained anything. The decision was made, you were left out, and that was it. But those are not people that you then tend to mimic. You only tend to you have a bad experience and you remember that, but you tend to mimic the great leaders or the ones who were actually prepared to make tough decisions, but at least show you the respect of explaining them to you.
Yeah. I think that's a brilliant point to end the podcast because, you started off speaking about George Graham and the way that he spoke to you and had that difficult conversation, and you end up explaining how you speak to clients. I think it's a fantastic way to end the podcast. But actually it hasn't finished yet because I've got some quick fire question. So the first one I'm going to say is, who is the best manager, leader in football that you ever knew or had the experience or pleasure of being led by, and why?
It would be two. George Graham, for all of the reasons I mentioned there, and Alan Ball, because he effectively he gave me the opportunity and he believed 100% in me. And I think when I was at Southampton, it was alongside the happiest time of my career. It was the time I played the most games because he had trust in me. The team worked well under him. We all wanted to play for him. And I think one of the biggest regrets, if I have any, I tend to not have any in sport, was that season you mentioned when we finished 9th in the Premier League, which was unheard of for a team like Southampton. Alan Ball left at the end of that season. He went to Man City. And I always think, what could we have achieved in that next season and maybe the season after? What players could we have attracted and how far could we have gone? Maybe Alan, when he was alive, maybe he contemplated that as well.
Yeah. And excellent. I mean, I think that the next question you probably answered, the dressing room you walked into and instantly knew the standards were right straight away. Which one and why were the standards right?
Two reasons, Arsenal and Tony Adams, who was just the most incredible individual in terms of leadership.
And what made Tony Adams a great leader?
So, quick example, if I can. I remember when Tony had his challenges, of course, and that's well documented. I remember that when I was in the reserves at the time, that was no mean feat to play in the reserves at the time as well. And we were playing a game at Highbury, played the reserve games at Highbury at that time. And I think it was a Tuesday afternoon we were playing. And you guys will know, reserve team sport is reserved for the coaches, the training staff, and maybe one man and his dog. So Tony was released from prison I believe on the Sunday evening. And we had this game on the Tuesday in the reserves. We didn't know he was going to be playing, but the jungle drums started to get around that Tony might play in the reserves on the Tuesday. So obviously that got around the fan base. And by the time the game came and it was 12 o'clock, we were playing Reading, there was over 10,000 people in the stadium. And Tony was He came into the dressing room very humble at that point. Obviously, 72 hours before he was at Her Majesty's pleasure. But to see how he reacted to that, having been where he was for the time he was, when he came out, even his physique, he looked like he'd been training every single hour of the day. He was absolutely lean. He was hungry. This was a reserve team game playing with kids. He went out there and he was the best player on the pitch, which doesn't say much for us. But in terms of how he talked to the young guys, how he led them, how he put 120% in every single thing he did, he lasted around 70 minutes, considering where he'd been before then. Honestly, it was like, how can I even liken it? I don't know. It was like Achilles coming back to the battlefield. It was where he belonged, and just leading by complete example. And I think we won the game 7-0 in the end. Would we won 7-0 without Tony? 100% we wouldn't. But that stays with me for a long time. That his presence alone was enough to raise everybody else to a level that was probably beyond us at that point.
You can train all you want, but some people are just like off the scale, like geniuses when it comes to leadership, and it sounds like Tony Adams was certainly that. And obviously it's an experience as well, like you'll take with you all the way through your life to play with someone like that, and it's something that money can never buy as well, Neil. So, pace or brain, what got you out of more trouble on the wing?
Pace.
Good. And
I'm sure every winner would give you the same answer.
You're asking the wrong guys on that, pace or brain, because we're front row forward, so it's just instinct for us. The signing or hire who changed the team without changing the team sheet, what did they do?
I would have to go back to the example I just gave you, Tony Adams. He wasn't a signing or a hire, but his presence that day was astonishing. And even after the game, what was more important, I think, after the game, as a true leader, which he was that very quietly and very deliberately, after the game, he came and sat with every single player and just said, how did you think the game went? How did you feel? How did I do? Did you enjoy playing, etc.? And he had that empathy to sit with each of us as young kids who were in awe of him, and just spend that time, probably to get a little bit more feedback for himself as well. But as I say, I think leaders also have to have that empathy for their team and try and understand any problems they might have in their personal life, etc. So just that example, that one example, and there'll be thousands of others that would say the same about their experiences with Tony Adams, but that one in particular was one that stays with me on a regular basis.
And that's pure business leadership gold. For him to do that, I mean, I just sit there and listen to it and go, wow, I'm kind of just amazed by that. And he's just out of prison as well. So coming on a sub, 4 minutes left, or waiting 10 years for a court case verdict, what tests your nerves more?
I think the court case, 100%, because there's an element of a lack of control there. When you're on a football pitch, to an extent, I know control's an illusion anyway, but you have an element of control. You can control certain things. When you're in a 10-year court case, everything is out of your control, out of your control to a point. So the court case over coming on as a substitute every time.
So winning a massive football match or winning a 10-year court case, where'd you get the most euphoria?
Different times, aren't there? There's nothing like, you guys know, there's nothing like winning a football match or a rugby game or a tennis match or anything like that. In a team environment, on those very rare days where everyone does their job and the game plan is executed to perfection and you win, there's nothing like that. Something that comes close is these Supreme Court judgments after 10 years, but I think I'd probably have to go with the winning a team environment match. Yeah, listen, in sport, you've been in the trenches with these guys day in, day out, haven't you? You spend more time with them than you do with your wife, in most instances. But the court cases are very different. They're very elongated. It's a lot of waiting around and lots of time to second guess, was the decision the right one, etc. In a sport environment, you make a decision and that's it, it's gone. You have to get on with it.
Okay, and one last question. One standard from elite football you've kept in your own law firm, and could you name it in one sentence?
Yes, try and create and replicate that team environment where everyone feels they've got a voice, everyone feels they've got an input, and that they are part of something that's just bigger than themselves. And if you can get that, and people can buy into them, you've got a real team there, and one that's very, very difficult to.
Yeah, it's hard. And do you think it's possible for business to like replicate 100% what happens in a sports team?
No, I don't think so, because the sport is, as I say, it's more immediate. I think in terms of businesses, you're thinking about days, weeks, months. With sport, it's immediate, isn't it? And the gratification is almost immediate. You make a decision in sport, you know immediately if it's wrong or if it's right. Business, you don't get that. You can get pretty close.
If you could bottle 5-10% of what you get in an elite team environment and bring it into a business, you'll make your business very successful. Having 100% of that is impossible. Probably compliance, commercial, whatever restraints, but just even bottling one bit of that atmosphere. And obviously you were very lucky with your sports career to experience some great players, some great leaders, and played in some great matches. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Neil.
Thanks, guys.
Echo that. Totally echo that, Neil. Absolutely fantastic. 4 moments, a sale that you didn't see coming. 4 minutes that turned a season. A firm built with no title to your name, and a decade held together until you won. The same engine runs through all of it. Read the system, find the one, clear action, and earn the authority rather than wait for it. That was an enlightening conversation. Thank you very much, Neil, for joining us on The Business End.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you.